Comment down what you think about these stories or just a hello and the team will reply. We always reply to the comments. As always, please like and subscribe and help this channel grow. Thank you. I thought I had scored an amazing deal on eBay. A brand new Louis Vuitton handbag for 80% off retail price. It seemed too good to be true, but the seller had good feedback and the listing photos looked legitimate. I hastily entered my credit card info, excited to surprise my wife with her dream designer bag. When the package arrived a week later, I eagerly tore open the packaging, only to find a cheap knockoff inside. My heart sank as I examined the fake leather and loose stitching. Nothing like the craftsmanship of a real Louis Vuitton. How could I have been so foolish? That nagging feeling that it was too good to be true should have stopped me from clicking buy it now. My frustration turned to dread a few days later when I received a fraud alert from my credit card company. Apparently, someone had tried to use my card to make big purchases at several luxury retailers. Thankfully, the credit card company caught the unusual activity and shut it down before any real damage was done. But now I had to cancel my card and deal with the hassle of getting a new one issued. As I went through my bank statements, I realized the fraud had started shortly after I made the eBay purchase. It all started to make sense. The seller must have stolen my credit card number and gone on a little shopping spree before the card got shut off. I felt so violated knowing some criminal halfway across the world had my personal information and tried to take advantage of me. I immediately contacted eBay to report the fraudulent listing. But of course, the seller's account had already been deleted. The user ID that just a week earlier had glowing buyer feedback now returned an error message. I was dealing with a ghost. eBay said they couldn't do anything without a valid seller account to investigate. My only other recourse was to leave negative feedback about the counterfeit item I received. But without a seller account, that feedback also disappeared into the void. I might as well have been shouting about the scam into an empty room. eBay's policies left me high and dry, with a useless fake handbag and a compromised credit card. Over the next few weeks, the identity theft nightmares continued. I noticed mysterious new email addresses popping up in my inbox. Clearly, this criminal had gained access to my email account as well. I changed my password, but the unwanted emails kept coming. It was like playing whack-a-mole with new fraudulent accounts popping up as fast as I could shut them down. It got worse when I started getting notifications about new online accounts being created using my name and information. This guy was trying to open dating and social media profiles pretending to be me, even using my photos, which must have been lifted from my social media accounts. I felt extremely creeped out knowing someone was virtually impersonating me in order to scam more innocent folks. I desperately tried to shut down the fake accounts and emails as they popped up, but it was a non-stop game of whack-a-mole. For every one I managed to get removed, 2 more seemed to take its place. I couldn't keep up with the relentless identity theft attacks. In a last-ditch effort, I contacted the police and filed reports about all the suspicious activity. But I could tell they had little ability or motivation to track down an international cyber criminal. The cop diplomatically informed me that perpetrators using aliases on the internet are extremely difficult to catch unless they make major mistakes. Essentially, I was on my own. Now, over a month since that fateful eBay purchase, I've finally gotten the identity theft somewhat under control. Looking back, there were a few steps I could have taken to protect myself and avoid becoming the victim of an eBay scam. First, I should have thoroughly researched both the seller and the listing before making a purchase. Their feedback rating seemed good at first glance, but looking closer I may have noticed red flags like short account history or lack of details in feedback comments. I also should have used a credit card instead of my debit card. Credit cards have much stronger fraud protection, so I wouldn't have had to deal with freezing my bank account. And I could have used an online service like privacy.com to generate a one-time virtual credit card number for the purchase. That way, even if the number got compromised, it couldn't be used elsewhere. Finally, I should have enabled 2-factor authentication on all my online accounts, especially email. That security barrier would have stopped the hacker from gaining access, even if he phished my password through the eBay purchase. A little extra diligence up front could have spared me a month of constant identity theft battles. My desperate identity theft whack-a-mole game has finally started to wind down over 2 months later. The fraudulent accounts have slowed to a trickle, knock on wood, but I still religiously check my credit reports and bank statements for any suspicious activity. I don't know if I'll ever stop feeling paranoid about the security of my personal information after this breach. I also hadn't made any online purchases since this eBay disaster. The thought of entering my payment info into a website gives me anxiety now, envisioning some faceless hacker on the other end ready to steal it. I used to love scoring deals online, but now I don't trust it. Maybe one day I'll try again with small purchases on reputable sites. But that eBay counterfeit bag certainly made me a much more cautious, reluctant online shopper. My hope in sharing this story is that others can avoid being similarly scammed. Don't let the seeming safety of a computer screen make you complacent. There are predators ready to take advantage of anyone who lets their guard down while shopping online. I've never been one for online shopping. The thought of buying something sight unseen from a complete stranger just never sat right with me. But lately I've been itching to redecorate my living room and refresh some of the old, worn furniture. And since money was a bit tight, I figured eBay might be a good option to score some deals. So one night, after a glass of wine boosted my courage, I took the plunge. I spent over an hour browsing eBay's furniture section until I landed on what looked like the perfect armchair. It was a rich brown leather recliner, the kind you sink into. The photo showed some light scuffing, but overall it seemed to be in decent shape. And at just $200 with free shipping, it was hundreds less than a new one. I took the leap and clicked Buy Now. A week later, I was giddy when the delivery truck pulled up outside. I had cleared space and was eagerly waiting to see my new chair in person. But as soon as the delivery men hauled it into my living room, I got a whiff of something peculiar. There was a harsh chemical odor coming from the armchair, almost like paint thinner or ammonia. One of the movers commented on the smell too, wrinkling his nose as he set the chair down. I inspected the chair closely and noticed an odd, greasy residue on parts of the leather. It left a sticky, stubborn stain on my fingers when I touched it. The more I looked, the more I realized this chair was in worse shape than the photos had let on. But that smell, that was the real red flag. This went beyond just surface dirt or wear. Something was wrong here. That night, I could still smell traces of the harsh chemical odor lingering in my living room. I opened all the windows to air the place out, hoping the scent would dissipate by morning. As I got ready for bed, I couldn't shake a growing unease. My online bargain felt more ominous by the minute. The next day, I started to feel unwell. It began with a dull headache and scratchy throat when I woke up. As the day wore on, it progressed to dizziness and blurred vision. By mid-afternoon, I noticed an angry red rash spreading across my hands and arms. That's when I knew I had to get checked out. At the urgent care clinic, the doctor frowned as I described my symptoms. She asked if I had been exposed to any chemicals or toxins recently. When I told her about the strange-smelling chair, her concern visibly deepened. She ordered a battery of tests, including a blood panel screening for toxins. It took a few days to get all the test results back, but soon I had a diagnosis: toxic chemical exposure from the armchair I had purchased on eBay. The doctor explained that the chair likely came from a home where drugs were manufactured or other illicit activities took place. The harsh chemical residues were byproducts that had seeped into the furniture over time. I was horrified. The seller clearly knew the chair was contaminated but sold it anyway, likely trying to discreetly get rid of incriminating evidence. They were willing to expose some unsuspecting buyer to these dangerous substances just to cover their own tracks. That was that unlucky buyer. Over the next few weeks, I underwent painful detox treatments to flush the toxins from my system. It was a grueling process that left me fatigued and nauseous. My doctor reassured me that given the mild exposure, I should make a full recovery, but it would take time. I also had to hire a hazardous materials removal team to come properly dispose of the contaminated armchair, another unexpected expense. In the months since this incident, I've become much more cautious about buying secondhand goods online. I do far more research into sellers now, looking for red flags. I ask a lot of questions about an item's origins and condition. And I have given up on furniture purchases sight unseen. The financial hit from my toxic eBay chair was substantial, but the toll on my health was far greater. You truly never know an item's full history or condition until it arrives on your doorstep. And with unknown sellers, taking even basic precautions is crucial. It has made me much more skeptical of the online secondhand marketplace as a whole. While my health has improved, I still find myself unnerved thinking back on this incident. It terrifies me to imagine the myriad ways unscrupulous sellers can take advantage online, using the anonymity to peddle dangerous or contaminated goods to unsuspecting buyers. I consider myself lucky that my exposure was limited. Others may not be so fortunate. Looking back, the old adage rings true. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. That unbelievable bargain could come with unexpected costs. For me, the hidden price was almost my health itself. In the future, I'll be sticking to trusted retailers, even if it means paying a little extra. Because as this horrific eBay experience taught me, safety and peace of mind are priceless. I was browsing eBay one night looking for some cute earrings to add to my collection. I came across a pair of dainty silver hoops being sold by a seller with the username Jewelry Lover 123. The earrings were only $12 and Jewelry Lover 123 had great feedback, so I went ahead and bought them. A few days after I placed the order, I received an email from Jewelry Lover 123 thanking me for my purchase. She said she'd hoped I would love the earrings and that she couldn't wait to hear my feedback. I thought it was a nice personalized touch, so I emailed her back saying I was looking forward to receiving the earrings. About a week later, the earrings arrived in a small padded envelope. They were just as cute as they looked online. I left positive feedback for the seller and didn't think much else about it. But then messages started coming more frequently. At first, it was just a follow-up asking if I had received the earrings, if I was happy with them. I replied saying yes and thanked her again for the earrings. But the messages kept coming over the next few weeks. Jewelry Lover 123 would email me every couple of days, asking if I was enjoying the earrings and if I could please leave feedback on her eBay profile so other buyers could see I was satisfied. She even suggested I post a photo of myself wearing the earrings. I started to feel a little uneasy about the constant contact, but I figured she was just a small-time seller trying to build up her feedback score. About a month after my purchase, I received an email from Jewelry Lover 123 that really gave me pause. She asked how that big work presentation I had mentioned went. Only problem was I never told her anything about a work presentation. I started to realize that this person somehow knew personal details about my life that I had never shared with her. From there, the messages got increasingly unsettling. She would reference upcoming events on my calendar or milestones in my life that I had never discussed with her. She even knew about a minor fender bender I had been earlier that week. I was seriously creeped out and couldn't figure out how she got all this information about me. That's when I realized she must have been stalking me online. My social media profiles were not private, so she could have been lurking in my pages for months without me ever knowing. I immediately made all my accounts private, but the messages from Jewelry Lover 123 kept coming. She said she just wanted us to be friends and for me to tell her more about my day-to-day life. I stopped responding at all, hoping she would get the hint. But then she started creating new gay accounts so she could keep emailing me. No matter how many times I blocked her, she would come back with a new username. I started dreading opening my inbox every day. This woman I had never met had developed some kind of unhealthy attachment to me. After weeks of harassment, I decided I had to get law enforcement involved. I filed reports on all the stalking and online harassment with both the police and with eBay directly. Thankfully, with their help, I was finally able to get Jewelry Lover 123 to stop contacting me. I have no idea what her issue was or why she became so obsessed with me over a single $12 purchase. But the entire frightening ordeal taught me to be much more cautious about what personal information I share online. You really never know who could be watching you behind the screen. I started questioning a lot of my online activity after that whole ordeal. I went through every social media profile and deleted anything too personal. I also made all my accounts completely private where only confirmed friends could see my posts. It was a bit of a painful digital decluttering process, but worth it for the peace of mind. Along with increased online privacy, I also became much more selective about sharing any details about my personal or professional life online. Even in discussions in closed forums or private messaging, I would stick to vague generalities and not give too much away. You really can't be too cautious these days. I was also more careful about posting any photos that revealed my location or activities. Check-ins at restaurants or events were eliminated from my profiles. I removed any pictures with street signs or recognizable landmarks in the background. It was astonishing how much sensitive information could be gleaned from casual social media posts when I really went back and audited my online presence. Beyond social media, I also changed how I interacted on e-commerce sites. I no longer use my full real name or other identifying details in my user profiles. My shipping addresses were input more generically without apartment numbers or cross streets. Everything I could do to anonymize myself further online, I implemented after the stalking incident. While it took some adjustment, over time my much more locked down and private online persona started to feel liberating. I was still able to connect with close friends and share parts of my life without fear, but I had taken control back and could browse and shop online again without worrying about strangers accessing my data. The stalking left emotional scars too. I had trouble sleeping and felt anxious when I heard my email ping with a new message. Loud vehicles passing by at night would startle me as I worried someone was outside my home. But therapy helped me process the traumatic experience and return to feeling safe again. My friends and family were also hugely supportive, checking in on me extra in the aftermath. With their support, the assistance of law enforcement, and changes to how I managed my digital footprint, I was able to move past that frightening ordeal. I'm much more vigilant now about protecting my privacy, but I refuse to be driven totally offline. With proper precautions, I can still enjoy the online world. I just make sure to exercise caution and control what information I share with strangers. Shopping eBay seems mostly safe, but you truly never know what darkness could be lurking behind a friendly online persona. I learned that lesson the hard way. I was so excited when I won the auction for a used laptop on eBay last week. The seller had a solid reputation with 100% positive feedback, and the laptop itself was a fairly recent model from a major brand, just a couple of years old. The bidding started low, around $250, but rapidly shot up towards the end. I threw down $512, my max budget, and luckily no one outbid me in those final seconds. When the laptop arrived 2 days later, I eagerly tore open the box and powered it on. To my relief, it booted up fine and seemed totally normal, even fast for its age. I ran it through some benchmark tests, and everything checked out. Over the next few days, I started customizing it, installing my favorite apps and syncing accounts. It handled everything I threw at it flawlessly. What a steal. About a week after getting the laptop, though, some strange behavior started cropping up. It would randomly freeze and restart at odd times, or apps would crash unexpectedly. I ran diagnostics, but no problems came up. A virus scan found nothing. Frustrated, I did a full reset, wiping the hard drive. That seemed to fix the issues for a day or two, but they soon returned. Clearly, there was some underlying hardware or software flaw that I'd have to get fixed. Fortunately, eBay has a 30-day return policy in cases like this, so I contacted the seller, explained the problems, and asked to return the laptop for a refund. At first, the seller was oddly eager, even offering to pay for shipping and pickup. But when I said I'd rather handle the return shipping myself, it got very pushy about wanting to retrieve the laptop in person right away. I explained I was uncomfortable meeting a stranger from the internet and would simply ship it back insured and require a signature, as is standard with eBay returns. That's when the seller's attitude took an aggressive and threatening turn. They insisted I must give the laptop back immediately, claiming they'd left some important data on it that I couldn't see but that they desperately needed back. I stood my ground, reiterating I'd handle the return properly through eBay. But the seller became increasingly harassing and intimidating. Angry voicemails and texts started coming in, demanding I hand over the laptop or else face consequences. The seller made vague but ominous threats, saying they'd make me regret it if I didn't comply. I tried to ignore the messages at first, but they kept escalating. Then one night someone actually showed up pounding on my front door yelling, clearly the seller trying to intimidate me in person. I didn't answer but watched nervously through the window as they shouted threats before leaving. Really rattled, I contacted eBay to report the seller's harassment over a simple return request. They assured me I was doing everything by the book and had full right to ship the laptop back on my own terms. They said they'd investigate the seller and take appropriate action. I also filed a report with the police about the in-person harassment, though they said there was little they could do without evidence of an actual crime. Over the next couple of weeks, the intimidation continued. The seller kept calling and leaving threatening voicemails. They somehow found my social media accounts and sent similar threatening messages through those. I blocked the seller everywhere I could, but they persisted, showing up at my home a few more times, banging on the door, looking in the windows. I worried what they might do next, maybe even try to break in. I kept hoping the seller would just give up, but the harassment was really taking a toll on me mentally and emotionally. I had trouble sleeping, felt constantly anxious about what this unhinged stranger might do next. I decided to stay with relatives for a bit, not feeling safe alone at home. After about 2 weeks of this, I finally worked up the courage to file for a restraining order. The police helped me document all the harassment and threats, and I was able to get a temporary protective order fairly quickly. That seemed to make the seller back off some, though they still tried contacting me by creating new anonymous social media accounts. Each time I blocked the new account and reported. Having the restraining order made me feel a little better protected, but I remained constantly on edge, wondering if the seller would eventually just snap and turn violent. I hardly left my house except to go to work, avoiding anywhere the seller might find me. A court date was set to consider making the order permanent, so I kept saving evidence to make my case. The night before the court hearing, the harassment escalated again. The seller showed up at my house shouting threats, throwing rocks at the windows. Terrified, I hid quietly, phone in hand ready to call 911. After 15 agonizing minutes, they finally left. In court the next day, I broke down recounting the abuse and my fears for my safety. The judge took pity and granted a permanent restraining order, barring the seller from contacting me in any way or coming near my home and work. Finally, having long-term protection gave me some peace of mind. But the damage was done. I was a nervous wreck, hardly sleeping or eating. My work performance suffered as I struggled to focus. When the seller still managed to send me an ominous threat through a new account, I completely spiraled, sure they would find a way around the order. I checked into a mental health clinic to recover from the trauma and try to regain a sense of security. After a couple weeks of intensive counseling and medication, I was stabilized enough to continue treatment as an outpatient. Throughout this whole ordeal, eBay had been supportive, refunding my money and permanently banning the seller from their site. But eBay also made clear that despite their ban, they had no control over the seller's actions, and any further issues were for law enforcement. With the seller still finding little ways to torment me from time to time online, I remained constantly vigilant and anxious. I seriously considered moving to get a fresh start, somewhere the seller couldn't find me. But not wanting to give up my whole life for this psycho's harassment campaign, I instead invested in home security, cameras, motion sensors, door reinforcements. Having these protections finally allowed me to start feeling safe again in my own home. It's now been about 6 months since I first bought that cursed laptop on eBay and set off this avalanche of abuse from the deranged seller. Though still dealing with lingering anxiety, the counseling and medication have helped immensely in getting my life back on track. The seller's attempts to contact me have tapered off, though I worry they may resurface at some point. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time, grateful to have survived this ordeal. My trust in buying online has definitely been shattered after seeing the dark side of some sellers. But with my new security measures in place, I'm hopeful I can move forward without constantly looking over my shoulder. I consider myself pretty savvy when it comes to online shopping, but I recently got burned badly on eBay and I want to warn others. I'm a huge fan of vintage music equipment and memorabilia. I regularly browse eBay for rare finds, and a few weeks ago I came across a listing for an original 1961 Gibson Les Paul guitar, supposedly signed by Les Paul himself. The pictures looked legit, and the seller had 99.7% positive feedback from over 500 transactions, so I decided to make an offer. We agreed on a price of $2,800, which was an absolute steal for such a rare collectible piece if real. I could barely contain my excitement as I waited for the delivery. When it arrived, I tore open the package, but my excitement quickly turned to horror. The vintage Gibson was clearly a cheap knockoff, with uneven frets and a tacky finish. The autograph was laughably fake, Sharpie ink still wet on the surface. My heart sank as I realized I'd been scammed out of thousands of dollars. I immediately contacted the seller, sending photos of the fake guitar and demanding a refund. But he accused me of trying to scam him, claiming he would never sell counterfeit items. He said I must have damaged the item myself, then tried to get my money back. I pleaded with him that I had been deceived, but he refused to budge. That's when I started to do some digging. I looked up the seller's name and found a trail of angry customers saying he had ripped them off too. He would list rare, coveted items for low prices, then send cheap replicas or broken goods. Anytime someone complained, he would gaslight them and threaten bad reviews. I felt sick realizing this guy had deliberately targeted me and others eager to score deals on our hobby. He knew enthusiasts would pay upfront without excessive vetting, counting on the fact that we wouldn't go through the long process of legal action over a few $100. He was basically running an eBay scam ring under the guise of as-is sales. I reported the seller to eBay, but they said I had to go through the official returns process first. After weeks of back and forth, he finally agreed to a partial refund, but only if I removed my negative review. I decided to cut my losses, not wanting to get tied up in a lawsuit over this. The whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth. This seller had taken advantage of my trust and enthusiasm as a collector. He's still out there ripping people off thanks to eBay's policies. I'm a lot more cautious now about verifying sellers and assessing risk before purchase. I just hope others learn from my mistake before getting duped too. The hobby that I loved has been tainted by this blatant deception. It hurts to know there are people willing to exploit fans to make a quick buck. I can't get back the money or excitement I lost, but hopefully telling my story will prevent someone else from being the victim in another eBay collecting nightmare. Do your homework so you don't end up in the same boat. After this experience, I started reaching out to others who purchased from this seller. It turns out I was just the tip of the iceberg. There were dozens of fans who had been scammed by this guy. He was very systematic, listing batches of counterfeit collectibles every few weeks, then shutting down accounts and reopening under different names once the negative reviews piled up. I even found a few unlucky souls who purchased big-ticket rarities for over $10,000, only to receive worthless junk. But he would BS his way out of refunds every time, claiming ignorance or accusing the buyer of tampering. eBay's mediation process frustratingly favors sellers in many disputes, so most people just gave up rather than continue fighting. It made my blood boil to see this schemer blatantly stealing money from fellow enthusiasts again and again. I collected screenshots, account information, and other evidence, compiling it into a detailed report. I sent it to eBay demanding they investigate and terminate all his accounts. After an agonizing month with no response, I finally received a generic message saying they addressed the issue. The scammer's main profile was shut down, but I soon spotted his new account up and running. He'd simply created a fresh identity, lying low for a bit before resuming his cons. It was clear eBay's safety systems could be easily circumvented by a dedicated fraudster. My heart sank realizing that without stronger protections, vulnerable shoppers would keep falling prey. In the aftermath, I joined online collector communities to help warn others avoid this predator's trap. I advised them to thoroughly vet high-dollar sellers, get photos of the actual item before paying, and use escrow services for very expensive purchases. Together we could self-police better than eBay ever would. It took me a while to rebuild my enthusiasm for collecting after getting targeted, but surrounding myself with fellow fans who understood helped me from becoming jaded. I'll continue hunting eBay for deals, but with far more caution and skepticism now. If my story helped just one person avoid being scammed, then at least some good came out of this nightmare experience. With more vigilance, we can take back control from these deceitful fraudsters. Don't let your excitement cloud your judgment. And remember, if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. Stay safe out there, fellow collectors, and happy hunting. I've always loved collecting vintage items. There's something special about holding on a piece of the past. So when I saw a rare antique music box for sale on eBay, I knew I had to have it. The seller didn't provide much background in the listing, only that it had been in her family for generations, and she was finally parting with it per her late grandmother's wishes. I felt a pang of sadness, imagining this woman finally letting go of one of her last connections to a departed loved one. But I told myself the sale would grant her grandmother's dying wish. I won the auction easily as I was the only bidder. A week later, an unassuming package arrived on my doorstep. I eagerly tore open the cardboard box, catching a waft of old paper and mothballs. Under layers of crinkly tissue paper lay the music box. It was a lovely thing, dark wood inlaid with mother of pearl, delicate carvings of roses covering its sides. My fingers found the key on its underside. A few winds brought the cylinders to life, plinking out a haunting melody. That's when I noticed the envelope resting inside the box, my name scribbled across it in wavering cursive. Hands trembling, I slid out the letter and began to read. The seller, Maggie was her name, explained that the music box had belonged to her grandmother, Louisa. Louisa had treasured the box, keeping it on her nightstand to play each night before bed. In her final days, she made Maggie promise to pass it along to someone who would appreciate it as she had. Maggie wrote that parting with the music box was harder than she expected. She said she could still feel Louisa's spirit within it. The letter closed with a chilling request. Please take care of her as if she were still part of the family. I shuddered, goosebumps rising in my arms. Maggie's words stirred an uneasiness in me that I couldn't shake. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I was visited by Louisa for the first time. She appeared in my dream as a wispy figure, face obscured by the gauzy white nightgown she wore. She stood at my bedside, peering down at me with blind eyes as a music box played faintly. I tried to ask what she wanted, but my dream self was mute. Her chilling visage lingered even after I woke. Over the next few weeks, Louisa haunted my dreams every night. Always by my bed, always soundless, always shrouded. I took to leaving the music box across the room, hoping the distance would deter her. But she continued to materialize at my bedside every night, more solid than the last. I decided I had to be rid of the box. I searched for Maggie's contact info to arrange a return, but the email attached to her eBay account was deactivated. Calls to the phone number listed went straight to a generic voicemail box. Maggie had disappeared. Part of me considered tossing the music box in the trash or even destroying it, but Maggie's plea to care for Louisa's cherished keepsake gave me pause. I found myself dusting it daily, making sure it was displayed prominently in my home. All the while, an oppressive dread bloomed in my chest. Louisa's appearances became more chilling. Her edges grew sharper, her visage clearer, her eyes locked intensely on mine. One night, I awoke to the sensation of her bony fingers circling my wrist. When I switched on the light, my flesh was imprinted with bruises in the shape of fingerprints. I confided in a friend about the haunting, playing it off with an anxious laugh. He gave me the number for a priest who could bless the house. But when I picked up the phone to make the call, an arctic wind blasted through the room, sending papers flying. The foam cord wrapped itself tightly around my wrists until they burned. Terrified, I put it out of my mind. That night, Louisa was waiting my gut in bed. She stood closer than ever at my side, her face mere inches from mine. I could make out her wizened features beneath the veil, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, thin, frowning lips. She opened her mouth, emitting a long, eerie moan that built into a shriek. I leaped out of bed, flicking on all the lights. My heart hammered as I scanned the room. It was emptied, of course. Just another nightmare. I shuddered, dragging myself back under the covers. But Louisa's horrible wail still rang in my ears. I barely slept that night. When I did drift off, I was tormented by visions of Louisa pleading and weeping over her music box. Her anguish felt so palpable it shocked me awake over and over. Come sunrise, I knew I couldn't go on like this. Enough was enough. I carefully wrapped the music box in layers of tissue paper and placed it back in its original shipping box. I addressed it with the return info still attached to the eBay sale. My hands quaked as I sealed the parcel, wondering if I was making a mistake. But as I dropped it at the post office that morning, an uncanny calm washed over me. I blinked in the daylight, seeing clearly for the first time in weeks. The nightmares, the dread, the oppressive gloom, it all lifted from my shoulders. I slept peacefully that night and every night after. The music box was finally out of my hands. I hoped it would find its way back to Louisa's family, back where it belonged. Its melody would haunt my dreams no more. In the weeks that followed, I scoured the internet searching for any trace of Maggie or her grandmother. Genealogy records, obituaries, anything to explain the bizarre events that had transpired. Finally, in a digital archive of old local newspapers, I discovered an intriguing classified ad from 1932. Missing since 3 April, small wooden music box engraved with roses. Belonged to my dear departed Louisa. Please return to Maggie R. if found. Further digging revealed Louisa had passed away in 1930. The music box must have gone missing before being passed down to her granddaughter Maggie. I shuddered at the implication that Louisa's spirit had been trapped, searching for her beloved treasure for nearly a century until I came along. While part of me was relieved to have an explanation, it also raised new disturbing questions. Had Maggie stolen the music box rather than inheriting it, she would have only been a child in the 1930s. Perhaps she felt entitled to it after her grandmother's death, and swiped it from the family home before it could be formally bequeathed. Even more chilling was the possibility that Maggie had discovered the music box years later, coming across it in some dusty estate sale or antique shop. Recognizing her grandmother's name, she crafted a story about inheriting it and conjured up a pretend connection. I'll never know the full truth of where the music box came from or Maggie's motives for selling it, but I do hope it has somehow found its way back to Louisa's family and that both she and Maggie are finally at peace. As for me, the memories of Louisa's tortured visits will forever linger in the dark corners of my mind, but I'm thankful the music box's haunting melody plays on in my dreams no more. I've been collecting vintage transistor radios for over 20 years now. It's a niche hobby, but I've managed to amass a sizable collection of rare antique models from the 1950s and 60s. One radio I had my eye on for a long time was the 1958 Belmont Satellite 300, an iconic model known for its space-age design. Recently, I spotted one in great condition pop up for auction on eBay and got into a fierce bidding war over it. After countless nail-biting bids, I finally won with my max bid of $650. I was thrilled to finally get my hands on this prized addition to my collection. The seller had good feedback, so I felt comfortable completing the sale. The radio arrived well packaged a few days later. It was in beautiful shape and worked perfectly. I left positive feedback right away, but then things took a strange turn. The seller started messaging me frequently, offering me other radios from his collection he thought I might like. At first, I didn't think much of it and politely declined each offer, but he became increasingly persistent, even aggressive with his sales pitches, claiming he could give me great deals on rare models he assumed I'd want. Before long, unsolicited packages with various vintage radios started showing up at my door. They came with invoices demanding I pay hundreds of dollars for each one. I never agreed to buy these items. I told the seller again and again to stop sending me things, but he wouldn't listen. The radios just kept coming with more threatening messages warning me I'd better pay up. He said I was obligated to buy anything he sent me. I tried explaining I had only purchased the one Belmont radio from him and refused to pay for these others, but he became enraged. He accused me of fraud, claiming I had agreed to purchase his entire inventory of radios. The harassment only got worse from there. He began posting lies about me on collector forums, warning people not to do business with me. He said I was a scammer who didn't pay for items I'd agreed to buy. My reputation was being smeared all throughout the community I'd been part of for years. Suddenly, sellers stopped responding to my inquiries and other collectors treated me like a pariah. This man was destroying my good name. I tried reporting his behavior to eBay since he was clearly unstable, but they said since the initial transaction was completed, it was now a personal matter between us. I couldn't even leave negative feedback about his terrifying harassment because too much time had passed. I felt powerless and alone as his vicious attacks only escalated. He kept posting damaging lies everywhere he could while continuing to inundate me with junk radios I never consented to purchase. The stress of the situation affected my health and my personal relationships. I became withdrawn, paranoid this man would show up at my house or harm me in some way. For my safety, I avoided collector meetups I'd enjoyed for years prior. My hobby had become tainted by this menacing stalker. No matter how many times I asked him to leave me alone, he'd only ramp up his harassment campaign. He was unhinged over the perceived notion I had wronged him in some way. I ended up having to completely abandon the vintage radio scene altogether just to escape this psychopath's wrath. Something meant to be fun and fulfilling turned into a never-ending nightmare over one eBay transaction gone horribly awry. I still have that Belmont Satellite 300 he originally sent, but it remains boxed up to this day, too painful of a reminder of how a cherished hobby was systematically destroyed by some eBay seller's disturbing obsession. I wish I'd never won that auction and just continued my search elsewhere. No rare radio was worth what it unleashed. Also, when I declined his initial barrage of follow-up offers, his tone became oddly wounded and bitter right away, like I had betrayed him personally. A normal seller would have just moved on to the next potential buyer, but he took my rejection of his items as an insult and snapped. At the time, I chalked it up to garden variety pushy salesmanship. In hindsight, it was clearly the start of an unhinged vendetta against me. I keep wondering if reporting him sooner could have mitigated some of the damage, but eBay's hands-off approach gave him free rein to terrorize me without consequences. Once he realized I wouldn't be an easy mark to keep buying from him indefinitely, he set out to methodically decimate my standing in the collecting community. Ironically, by winning the auction, I had given him all my contact and personal info he needed to target me. Whenever I tried to plead with him to leave me be, he'd fly into a scary rage about me needing to show him proper respect. I still have no idea what his end goal was or why he became so obsessed with tormenting me over a few declined radio offers. Maybe he saw dollar signs and resented losing out on a potential long-term buyer. Or maybe he specifically sought out vulnerable targets to exert control over. I'll never understand the motivations of a madman. Part of me considered trying to get law enforcement involved as the harassment turned potentially criminal, but without sufficient evidence or resources on my end, it seemed futile. All I could do was cut off contact and wait for him to find another target. It pains me to think he could be victimizing other collectors now with his unhinged bullying. And I still feel ashamed for abandoning a hobby that once brought me so much joy and connection. He succeeded in stoking paranoia and dread within a community meant for camaraderie and shared passion. Proceed with caution in this hobby, lest you end up starring in your own eBay horror story. I was so excited when I won the auction on eBay for the new Superphone 3000. I had been wanting this top-of-the-line smartphone for months but could never justify paying full price. When I saw a new one listed for half the retail cost from a seller with a long history of positive reviews, I knew it was too good to pass up. I placed my winning bid and eagerly awaited my new purchase. The seller quickly sent me an invoice and I paid right away. The listing said to allow up to 2 weeks for delivery, so I tried to be patient. A week later, I received a notification that my order had shipped. Finally, after another agonizing week of waiting, a package arrived on my doorstep. I excitedly tore open the box only to find an empty charger instead of a phone. My heart sank. I immediately contacted the seller through eBay messaging to explain the situation, but received an auto reply that the account was no longer active. I searched online for any trace of the seller, but found nothing. Their user profile, feedback history, everything had vanished. It slowly dawned on me that this was an elaborate scam. The seller had created a fake identity, posted a fraudulent auction for a too-good-to-be-true deal, collected as many bids as possible, then disappeared with the money before anyone received the actual product. And thanks to their disappearing act, I had no way to get my money back or even report them. I was devastated. That was no small amount of money for me. I saved up for months before feeling comfortable enough to make such a big purchase. Now all that careful budgeting was lost to some con artist. In a last-ditch effort, I contacted eBay customer support and explained I was a victim of a scam. However, since the seller's account was now gone, they said there was nothing they could do. I felt so powerless and taken advantage of. From then on, I was much more cautious with eBay. I learned to spot the warning signs of a fraudulent seller, like no feedback history or prices that seemed too good to be true. But the damage was already done. I never got back the money I lost or the smartphone I had been so excited to own. That experience taught me you can't trust everything you see online. Even lengthy positive feedback and the appearance of a reputable seller could simply be fabricated. Now I only use eBay for small purchases here and there, and I thoroughly vet each seller before bidding on bigger ticket items. I also make sure to pay with PayPal or a credit card whenever possible, so I have some form of buyer protection. Losing that money and getting ripped off made me feel violated in a way, like the stranger had stolen from me and faced no consequences. I'll never understand how someone can knowingly scam others and live with themselves. But I suppose that's the risk you take using sites like eBay. You never truly know who is on the other end of that auction. I'm much wiser now when it comes to online marketplace platforms. I learned the hard way not to let excitement over a good deal cloud my judgment. If something seems too good to be true, it very well may be. I'll never make a major purchase from an eBay seller without thoroughly checking their background again. Being scammed once was enough for me. That experience turned what should have been a joyous occasion into one I'll always regret. The thrill of winning an auction for my dream device quickly turned to anger, frustration, and mistrust. I wish I could go back and tell my past self to walk away from that deal. But hindsight is 20/20. Now I know the red flags and warning signs. All I can do is be more careful in the future and never let my guard down, even when a seller seems legitimate. I won't let the bad eggs out there stop me from using eBay, but I'll certainly be wiser next time. It took me a while to get over the bitterness from that scam. I felt like such a fool for falling for it. But in time, I realized all I could do was take it as a life lesson. Now I'm much less trusting of rock-bottom prices and glowing seller profiles. When I do shop online, I take precautions like researching the seller thoroughly, paying with buyer protection, and avoiding too-good-to-be-true deals. It may mean missing out on some supposed bargains, but that's better than losing hundreds of dollars again. In a way, I'm almost grateful for that bad experience because of how much it taught me. I'll never make those same mistakes again. I had to learn through getting burned, but now I know what to watch out for. I try to educate others too, so they don't end up in the same position. My eBay scam story has a silver lining though. I ended up finding a gently used Superphone 3000 model for an almost comparable price from a seller with flawless reviews. I met them locally to inspect the phone before purchasing. It works perfectly. I know who I handed my money to face to face. Sometimes an extra dose of patience and caution pays off in the end. I may have gotten scammed once, but I didn't let it make me cynical. I still use eBay all the time. I just make sure to verify sellers now. I share my experience to help others avoid the same pitfall. Getting duped stung, but it taught me to be smarter and safer in the future. Now I know purchasing from an online marketplace comes with risks, but a few precautions can help you shop smartly. That hard lesson is one I certainly won't forget. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.